Welcome to New York Got Game.
What a week for the Knickerbockers. Free agency started. They picked up 2 good pieces. And folks, the search is over. The Knicks have found their next head coach. They've named it. It is Mike Brown, and we're here to talk all about it. We're going to talk about the new head coach. We're going to talk about free agency. We're going to talk about what this means for the Knicks going forward. Got a special guest joining me this week to talk all about it. So you know how we do. We're not going to waste any time. We're going to get right into it.
The Knicks are heating up.
It's a new era for the New York Knicks. The team hired Mike Brown as their next head coach. They signed veteran guard Jordan Clarkson, and they also brought in big man Guerschon Yabusele, all signaling that they're going for it this season. To break it all down, I'm joined by one of the best minds in Knicks content creation. He is the dean of Knicks Film School. It's my guy, Jonathan Macri, who joins me now. J-Mac, what's good?
Belated happy 4th of July to you, Dexter. I know we were just talking about our respective holidays. I'm glad you had a good one. I had a relaxing one, which was a welcome change from a pretty hectic week where this basketball team was concerned. So I didn't mind it at all.
No, it was good. This week was hectic. You and I were supposed to talk about this earlier in the week, well, part of this at least, and it didn't happen. But I did have a good 4th of July. I just told you I spent a lot of time in front of the grill, maybe more time than I've spent in front of the grill in quite some years. And it was a little hot, but it was a good 4th of July around some good people. Can never complain about that. But speaking of 4th of July, Knicks, they made fireworks this week, J-Mac. We're going to start at the top of this because what was your initial reaction to the Knicks hiring Mike Brown as their next head coach? That's kind of the big firework this week, if you want to say. What was your reaction to that?
I mean, I could get cute here and answer, well, I wasn't surprised because he was the only coach left after they asked a whole bunch of teams to talk to their head coaches, and all those teams said no. But no, I think when you have a team like the Knicks where they're at, which is, and Andrew Claudio, our mutual friend, has been talking about this a lot, an unprecedented position of having fired a coach who just took the team to the Eastern Conference Finals. I think you need to hire someone not only with prior head coaching experience, but someone who has been in the sorts of jobs that present at least a similar type of pressure. And I know we're going to talk about the pressure on this particular job later, to the one he's going to face here. We've talked about this a lot. He's coached, LeBron James. He's coached Kobe Bryant. He has, albeit in an associate coach capacity, but then briefly in the head coaching stint, coached Steph Curry and, the Warriors, that kind of dynasty team a few years ago. So I don't know that there was anyone out there on the market, certainly, who was available to be hired that had both the resume that Mike Brown brings and also kind of the acumen to deal with what he's going to face, both from an external pressure standpoint and frankly from an internal pressure standpoint. Because I know, look, if this team or if this front office, this owner didn't think this team was capable of winning the championship next year, they would not have made this change. But that's the reason why they made the change. And now it's up to Mike Brown to take him to the promised land.
Yeah, it is. We'll get into that and the pressure of it. I do think it's a pretty good hire. I understand that it's not the sexy hire, J-Mac, for a lot of people. And I think some people, I've seen this in the fan base, some people are disappointed by it. But I just do think, he's the hire for where they're trying to go. And we'll see if it works out. We don't know. Time will tell on that, but we'll see. But I do have to ask this, from a basketball philosophy standpoint, right? We talk about Mike Brown. Is he a good fit for this current Knicks roster, or does he need different pieces to fully implement his style?
I'm going to actually go back to something you just said, which is people's disappointment. And I wonder, when I think about the basketball philosophy of a Mike Brown, what more do those people want in the next head coach, right? Because we could sit here and we could talk about assistant coaches, across the league who maybe are hot names, or even a Taylor Jenkins, who, to whatever extent that he had a philosophy in Memphis, his front office brought in 2 assistant coaches, 2 associate head coaches, essentially, to change that philosophy last offseason. So if you hire one of those people, you have no idea what philosophy you're getting. At least with Mike Brown, you have a track record of a few things. For one, someone who emphasizes defense. He always preaches defense. Number 2, accountability. And I think, that's going to be an interesting line to toe with a veteran team that, we've heard about Mike Brown's long practices and whatnot. They're not going to need to be pushed like a young team who has never been here before. But at the same time, we saw this team underperform fairly regularly last year. So I think that accountability, maybe even, extra accountability in practice will be a good thing. And then the last thing I'll just say, I guess more of an X's and O's standpoint, I think we saw that in the Sacramento time period for Mike Brown, he embraced a lot of the basketball traits that he saw with those Warriors, again, where he was an assistant under Steve Kerr for 6 years. It was a lot of movement. If you want to call it pace and space, that's fine. I looked up at the stats earlier today. In both of Mike Brown's 2 full seasons as head coach of the Kings, they were at or near the top of the league, not only in passes per game, but assists per game and potential assists per game. I think when you look at the Knicks roster and you look at what could elevate them to the next level, that's the department, the playmaking, the passing, that you're going to want to see an advancement in to reach their, the next goal here.
Yeah, and that's something I'm very interested in too, J-Mac. And we'll get to this as well too, like what he can do with the offense, not just the offensive side of the ball, but what he can do to this offense to try to elevate it to another level. And I do find it funny that we're here now with Coach Mike Brown, because I think it was about a month ago, a couple episodes ago on the show, I had Sean, your colleague, on with me. And we went through the potential candidates, what we thought were our top 5 candidates for Knicks' next head coach. And I brought up Mike Brown, and Sean was like, I don't know. He was on the fence about Mike Brown, but I kind of sold him. And I said, hey, for a lot of the reasons you mentioned, I think he could be a guy who can sort of steady the culture, which is a word that's always used a lot, right? He has been through a lot of different situations as a coach that could be valuable here in a win-now situation, and we're going to get to that win-now of it. But when you look at Mike Brown, J-Mac, he's been praised for his player development. He's been praised for the word I just brought up, culture building. Mm-hmm. But we got to mention what you talked about. This is a win-now team. Do you think he can balance both of those missions, whether it's player development and culture building here in New York? Can that happen?
I think, yes. The short answer is yes. I think he can. And I think when you talk about culture, I think in general, that kind of has a certain connotation in the NBA where it's like, everybody's pulling in the same direction and, everybody's out there and giving 100%, at all times. And there's, mutual respect in the locker room and all those sorts of things. I think there could be different definitions of culture. And I'm not about to insinuate that the culture with the Knicks was bad last year, but I think, with Tom Thibodeau, going into a season and probably going into a game, for as much as he could sit in front of a podium and say, just because a guy is situational, just because he's not in the rotation, he's got to stay ready. That gets old kind of quick. You know what I mean? And I think we've already heard some reporting about how one of the main criteria for this front office in hiring Mike Brown is that, does he have a plan to not only give lip service to, I'll play the younger players, but to actually get the younger players minutes. And I want to refer back to his Sacramento teams. Yes, they got some good health luck, and their starting 5 played in a lot of games. But if you actually go back and you look at the minutes that their players played, he really spread it out. He never overextended his starters too much. He gave, guys on the bench a chance. I think, again, it's a maybe a different definition of culture, but I think it's important for this franchise right now to make sure that everybody on the roster feels like they are a valuable contributor to this shared mission of going out and winning a championship this year. I think from that perspective, and obviously, again, I talked about the other stuff. He's coached LeBron. He's coached Kobe. He's coached Steph. He knows what it is to be in a situation that is absolutely, you must win this year. So I think he has the experience he needs to balance both of those masters, and I think he's going to do it just fine.
So I want to piggyback off of that a little bit before we move on, because, you said something that I think is really important, J-Mac, in terms of you want everybody on the team to feel like they're part of it, right? And we know this is a criticism of Tibbs, the former head coach, was that, right, he only went 7-8 deep. But we also look at the teams that got to the finals this year. In Indiana, in Oklahoma City, they played 10 deep, right? I think you and I are on the same page as this, and think that what the Knicks have been putting out there through PR and through reporting that this is something they want to expect in terms of development of young players. But some people say, well, you got to win now team. That's not possible. I disagree with that. What do you say to that? Because you believe that Mike Brown can do it, but do you also believe that one is possible, J-Mac, and two, is it necessary in today's NBA?
You can't. I'm not going to sit here and say you can't win playing only 7 or 8 guys anymore, because every team is different. The Boston Celtics just 1 year ago won with, 7.5, shall we call it, guys. Sam Hauser kind of gave them a few minutes here or there. But even, you look at Kristaps Porzingis hardly played in their playoff run last year, and they still won it all.
Yep.
I do think, offenses are not going backwards. The level of offensive sophistication is only going higher. And if you look at the Thunder, a team that won with defense, well, how did they win? It's because every guy that they put on the floor at all times went 100 miles an hour. There was never such a thing as any Thunder player going out there and giving it anything less than 100%. So whether you're winning with offense or whether you're winning with defense, you have to go for a full 48 minutes. And I think, again, this is going to come off as critical of Tibbs, which you know me. I'm a huge fan of Tom Thibodeau. I think he did a lot of great stuff here. But how many times did we watch the Knicks go out there this year and kind of start off in like a lesser gear, almost as if they were easing into the game? And you ask yourself, well, why did they do that? They did it because they knew the minutes that were in store for them on that particular evening. So I think if you get a coach that, from the outset, everybody on the floor, everybody on the roster knows, there's going to be reinforcements coming. We are not going to need to go 38, 40, 42, 44 minutes tonight. I think you have to play that way. And unless you have a certain type of team, and I think we saw it last year, this is not that type of team. They need the guys at the back end of the roster to contribute.
I agree. I 100% agree. We're going to see. It's going to be very interesting to see how Mike Brown navigates this roster, minutes, all of that stuff. Now, in terms of the offense, there's been talk about Brown adding more movement, spacing to the offense. What changes do you expect to see schematically on that end that differ very much from what we saw from Tom Thibodeau?
All right, I'm going to keep stealing from my KFS colleagues here. DJ Zullo, who does great film work here with us, put out a tweet a few days ago comparing the average dribbles per possession, I believe it was, for De'Aaron Fox under the years that Mike Brown coached him in Sacramento, and then the same stat for Jalen Brunson. And the long and the short of it is, when Jalen Brunson has had the ball, a lot of time goes off the clock, a lot of dribbles. It's basically a lot of time with the ball in his hands. De'Aaron Fox, on paper, similar type of player, right? Ball dominant, shoot first point guard, not maybe known for his passing as much as his ability to score. And yet, Mike Brown got him to buy into a system where he not only, got off the ball a little bit more, but when he didn't have the ball, there was a lot of movement around, whether it was Domantas Sabonis at the top of the key or other pieces that were instrumental in making that offense hum, once upon a time, the best offense in the history of the league 2 years ago. I think that's what we are looking for here. And I think the challenge for him is going to be, much like he did in Sacramento, he's going to have an incredibly gifted offensive center hub option in Karl-Anthony Towns. We've seen Towns operate from the top of the key and make some, or even the top of the arc, because his range is, I think, longer than Sabonis's. That said, he is not the passer that Sabonis is. He's not the screen setter that Sabonis is. So if you're talking about dribble handoffs, So I'm curious, what are the ways that Mike Brown is going to be able to implement aspects of that Sacramento offense where it was really reminded you of watching the Warriors, a lot of movement, a lot of cutting, split actions is something that's been mentioned a lot, but do it with a group of personnel that is slightly different. Again, nobody's saying these Knicks aren't talented, but this is going to be, I think, a great test of his coaching acumen. How could he implement these sorts of things with a slightly different group of players?
Yeah, no, I'm really that's probably top of my list, what I'm most intrigued to see with him, how he diversifies this offense. And you know what, J-Mac, there's been some talk about, will Jalen Brunson adjust the way we saw De'Aaron Fox do off the ball? I think if you notice, even if you go back 2 seasons ago, Jalen Brunson was doing a little bit of more stuff off the ball if you watch him closely. So I think he will adapt fine, and we know the leader that Jalen Brunson is. I think he's going to do whatever it takes to win. So I actually don't see that being a problem for the Knicks in terms of that, his adaptability. Now, defensively,
he might welcome it.
Yeah,
he might welcome it because the toll that it takes, he'll never complain about it, and he'll never let anybody know it. But you know the toll that it takes on him. And then if you really want to get the dominoes falling, might that allow him to be able to give a little bit more on the defensive end, which, again, it gets into a whole other conversation. But all these things have to do with each other.
Yeah, they do. Now, you talked about, Mike Brown and how good his defense is. He has a strong track record on that end from his coaching stops. What do you think Knicks fans should expect from him on that side of the ball in terms of what he could bring to the team that might be a little bit different than we saw under Tom Thibodeau?
So, Mike Brown has coached 10-plus seasons in the league, but other than Sacramento, all of his previous stops were, about at least a decade ago. I mean, I know the last Cleveland job was, I guess, maybe 14, 15, something around there. But so I say that to say that whatever he used to do defensively, it was almost a different league back then. So I'm going by what we saw in Sacramento. And what we saw in Sacramento was him using Domantas Sabonis, who was obviously a defensively challenged center, in a much more active capacity than simply, what you usually see with, defensive centers who are maybe not as gifted in a deep drop and just kind of minimizing the damage. Yes, there were times where you saw Domantas Sabonis in a drop and even in a deep drop. And it doesn't matter what defense you're running, you're always going to get some of that. It's a necessary evil. You can't have big guys like this, out on the perimeter every defensive possession. But I think for all of last year, we were waiting to see Tibbs lean more into the version of Karl Anthony Towns defensively that we saw in Minnesota when, they would have him out hedging at the level and then recovering back. Now, where it gets interesting, I think one of the things that allowed them to do that was the presence of Rudy Gobert on the floor, which opens up a whole nother question. And again, you talk about defense. If Mike Brown is really a defense-first coach, is he going to put his best defensive personnel on the floor, which means is he going to play Mitchell Robinson a significant number of minutes, which would seem to lead to the conversation of does Mitch start, or is he going to try to roll with the same basic alignment, give or take a Josh Hart that the Knicks went with for the majority of last year, where Cat is the starting five on defense? I think for me, other than what we talked about on offense a second ago, that's my most interesting question, because it kind of tells you a little bit about how does Mike Brown think he's going to be able to win? Is he going to win with the best offense in the league and a league average defense, or is he going to try to get into the top 10, top 8 in both of those categories? I'm fascinated to find out the answer.
Yeah, I would even throw another possible starting lineup change. Just Deuce coming to the starting lineup as well, too, is another possibility I find interesting. But will you be concerned about lack of size in the backcourt? There's a lot of possibilities for him here that could be very interesting on offense and defense, so we'll see. But the other thing we know, J-Mac, pressure. How much pressure do you think is on Mike Brown in year one, especially given the Knicks' expectations after last season's playoff run? And, basically, I don't want to say he's on the hot seat, but is he starting off maybe it is a hot seat. I don't even know. Is he starting this off like, you better win or else? It feels like that, like at least that much. It feels like this. But how much pressure do you view as on Mike Brown coming into this? Because I can't think of a Knicks coach that started his Knicks coaching career with more pressure than him. I mean, maybe I'm missing one, but you tell me.
It's a little different because, and this was right before I started watching the team, and I was a kid anyway. But Pat Riley, when he came here, it was like, from what I know, it was this feeling of like, oh, we got him, right? We got the guy that led the Lakers to their world championships. He was, seen as God's gift to coaching, and he came here as this conquering hero before he had ever coached a game. Now, obviously, there was pressure at that time. Patrick Ewing was in the midst of his prime, but I think there was so much excitement about the arrival of Pat Riley that overshadowed the amount of pressure to win. And also, it was Pat Riley. I don't know that there's been a coach in the history of the NBA that has dealt with pressure quite as well as Pat Riley. So I think this is unprecedented. I think this is the most pressure a New York Knicks coach, certainly in his first year on the job, has ever faced. As far as, how is he going to deal with it, or what is going to happen if he falls short? I mean, this is going to seem like a cop-out answer, but I do think it depends slightly on how things play out. I think, and the way I'm going to justify that is look at last year, or the year that just finished. Because if you would have told anybody before the season that the Knicks would dethrone the defending champions in the second round and then lose in the Eastern Conference Finals in 6 games, in a scenario where they lost one of those games in a way that you could have played that game out 1,000 times and they figured out the one way out of 1,000 to lose. And it really, I mean, maybe some people thought that was Tom Thibodeau's fault. I did not. I thought that was just a complete kind of freak set of circumstances, and that the coach would be fired. People would have thought that was crazy. But if you look at it and you actually watch the games, as you were watching, you're like, the sum of the parts is not adding up. You know what I mean? And so I think if you flip it on its head next year and it does pass the eye test, so to speak, and you see meaningful change in how the offense operates and how the defense operates, but maybe they get in like a tough Eastern Conference, playoff series, maybe somebody gets injured for a few games, maybe a team gets really hot, something, unforeseen, but they play well. And you saw real evidence of progress and real evidence of change. Maybe the younger players look a little bit better. I could see it being like, okay. Even then, do we think like everyone's going to keep their jobs and no one's going to get traded if this team bows out in the second round next year? I kind of find that hard to believe.
Yeah, I find that hard. I find that really hard to believe. But then I think that goes into, and I'll get to this a little bit later, but it's funny because I remember asking you this question before the start of last season. What defines a successful season? And that always can change from year to year, circumstance to circumstance.
It could change week to week.
Week to week, yeah. It could change after a 3-game losing streak in December, right? These things can change all the time. And so it's tough to answer that question because, and we'll try to do this later, but what you and I may look at it is how somebody else may look at it differently. And at the end of the day, the front office has said what they look at this team as. And I kind of said this at the top, and the changes they made with the coaching change, with the moves they've made. So they're thinking that this is a championship level team. Now, if they don't accomplish that, and Stephen Bondi asked me this question the other day, and I thought it was a good question he tossed to me. He was like, well, who's accountable for that then? Right? Because you don't got another coach to fire. I mean, you can always fire another coach, but
you could. Phoenix does.
Good point. And at one point, remember when the Knicks were run a lot like Phoenix, right?
Yes. Let's hope it. Let's hope that's past tense.
Yes, we hope that's in the past tense. But you don't know. We'll get to that in a second, folks. Don't worry. We're going to get back to but the point that J-Mac brings up about the pressure around head coach Mike Brown is real, and it's not going away anytime soon. Now, let's talk some free agency because they added Jordan Clarkson in free agency. Veteran guard, can create some offense. What do you think his role is going to be off the bench? Is it just go get buckets? Or, could we see him in more expanded closing lineups with this team? How do you see Jordan Clarkson fitting in?
If you're playing against a real team, a real offense, to say nothing of in a playoff series where teams have a chance to game plan, I have a tough time seeing a scenario where Jordan Clarkson and Jalen Brunson and Karl-Anthony Towns are going to be able to be on the floor at the same time, again, in the last 5 minutes of a close playoff game. That said, you asked me, what do they need him to do or what should we expect from him off the bench? This team was a 51-win team last year, or 52, however many won. They won a lot of games. And they made it to Eastern Conference Finals, and they had one guy that could get into the teeth of the defense. And that one guy, Jalen Brunson, can't even really get all the way to the hoop. Now, to his credit, he does not need to get all the way to the hoop because he is so gifted from the mid-range. He might be maybe the best mid-range scorer in the league. But Jordan Clarkson gives them a guy who can cave in a defense. And the reason he can cave in a defense, as you're seeing on the highlight package here, is that he is also a respectable shooter from long range. And you might look at his percentages the last few years and say, 33%, 34%. Like what? That's teams, that's not a great number. Teams are always going to guard him. There are 33% shooters who teams don't guard. Heck, Josh Hart, 36 or 37% sometimes, in his career, and teams won't guard him. But a guy like Jordan Clarkson is always going to get guarded out there. And because he always gets guarded out there, he's always going to be able to get into the teeth of the defense. He can pass it. He can make every pass in the book. I think you looked at some games where he had tunnel vision the last few years in Utah, in particular last year, and you wonder, is that just who Jordan Clarkson is, or is that because he's playing for a team that's trying to lose games? I think there's still reason to believe that Jordan Clarkson, the former sixth man of the year, a guy who was a really valuable piece on some winning teams for a lot of years in his career, I think that guy's still in there. So he's going to be relied upon, again, get into the teeth of the defense, make the appropriate passes when they're there. Otherwise, try to score the basketball.
Yeah, that will be his role. What did you make of the Guerschon Yabusele signing? How do you see him fitting in with his front court rotation, particularly next to lineups with Cat or Mitchell Robinson?
I love him because I love him with both of those guys. If you have him on the floor with Mitch, you have your defensive center, and then Guerschon sprays the floor because he was, close to a 40% three-point shooter last year. And then if you have him out there with Cat, you're going to be able to get a ton of size, two players who ostensibly, are centers in how big they are, but they could also shoot the three. I really am looking forward to that group, the Cat, Guerschon, and then whoever else they put with him. And again, as you could see from the highlights, when he gets in the restricted area, he's a force. He is more of a 1 foot leaper, not as much of a 2 foot leaper, which impacts him on defense. But he could put the ball on the floor. He could beat a closeout. He's a really, really talented player, really, really talented scorer. And he seems like he has the right mentality, to use an overused term. He's got some dog in him. I know you couldn't tell last year because he played for that awful Sixers team, but I think he's going to bring something. He's going to fit in well with the locker room, and I would be surprised if he wasn't playing a pretty significant role here.
Yeah, no, I'd be surprised. I think he's a good signing off the bench. I like both these pickups, and I'll say this: Clarkson, Yabusele, solid pickups for me. But when you look at these pickups, and the Knicks improved their bench, they were dead last in bench scoring last year. Do you think the Knicks have truly improved their roster yet this offseason?
I think the same fundamental questions are still there, which is your two best players, or your two best offensive players at least, are both liabilities on defense. So, and then you get into it a little further and you say, all right, do they have the collection of skills? Do their best players have the right collection of skills to go all the way? Is Mikal Bridges a good enough ball handler? Is OG Anunoby a good enough decision maker with the basketball? When he's driving or attacking a closeout, is Josh Hart ever gonna shoot it when it counts and make it? Those questions haven't gone away, and like all of the guys, like Yabusele, Clarkson, whether they're the seventh man, eighth man, sixth man, they're not the first best player, the second or the third, or even the fourth. They're not in that echelon. Your best players from last year are still your best players from this year. So I do think that they have improved the roster, but I think more than that, there is going to need to be a fundamental change of, I guess you'd say, of approach on both sides of the ball, because I just don't think they were good enough on either end of the floor last year. And I say that cognizant of the fact that they were a game one crazy finish away from potentially being in the NBA Finals and facing off against a young Thunder team where who knows what would have happened. But I think they need to still work out some kinks, and I don't think those kinks got worked out last year. Hopefully they get worked out, before the season.
That is the hope. We'll see if they worked it out. We'll see if the roster is exactly the same as it is right now. But there has been some buzz about the Knicks being interested in Ben Simmons, talking about former Philly players. Do you think he's worth taking a chance on at this point in his career, and does he fit any team any need, I should say, that this team has right now?
Oh, Dexter, why'd you have to ask me the Ben Simmons question?
I had to. The people want to know. I had to throw it in there. People want to know.
Look, I think Ben Simmons has caught a bad rap because, ever since really that Hawks series, which, kind of ended his career as we knew it, he's been a punching or a punchline in the league. He's still a talented player, and he's a talented player because if he wasn't a talented player, Ty Lue wouldn't have played him. And Ty Lue had him out there. He was a valuable piece of the Clippers bench unit last year. I think he could still work. I think he could still help a team. I am leery of having a player who is at this point probably an 8th or 9th or 10th man on a roster being someone that you have to make accommodations for, which is to say he probably is going to have to be the only non-shooter on the floor. Maybe you could afford to have one other non-floor spacer, but in the playoffs, even that's not going to cut it. So, you make concessions for your best player. You make concessions for your second best player. You don't make concessions for your 9th best player. That said, if it looks like their roster is going to shake out in such a way where, he's going to be on the floor in bench units with, again, I'm just off the top of my head, Guerschon Yabusele, Josh Hart, Deuce McBride, and Jordan Clarkson. That's a lot of shooting out there. And the one non-shooter, Josh Hart, there are ways he can mitigate that. You could talk me into that lineup. I think the more interesting thing that it says to me that they're even looking at a Ben Simmons is that they are planning on playing a lot of guys this year, because I just don't think they would go out and even be entertaining the idea of bringing in a Ben Simmons to ride the bench and be situational. And we know they already have 9 seemingly guaranteed rotation players. So again, that speaks to a fundamentally different organizational philosophy for this year, which they're going to expect Mike Brown to implement and make sure that he, goes as deep into his bench as he needs to have a long playoff run.
The thing for me is it's a little bit of what you said, where I'm not sure I would want, if I'm the Knicks in terms of roster building, to add a third non-shooter to the team. You already have one in Mitchell Robinson. You've got one in Josh Hart. Primarily, he's not as willing to shoot. Ben Simmons won't shoot at all.
No, he's afraid to.
He's afraid. Yeah, he's not going to do that at all. So I'm not sure if you want to. Granted, I hear your point is that if you have him as a depth piece with that second unit, he provides some defensive stability for them. Maybe not that bad. The other thing I'll say is maybe you could just give those minutes to a guy you drafted, Pacome Dadier. Maybe that would be a little bit more valuable to happen, and that kind of would link to what the Knicks front offices at least claim they want to do. So we'll see. Now, with that being said, I have to wonder if the Knicks are done adding to this roster this offseason. Do you expect the Knicks to make any more signings, whether it's Ben Simmons, somebody else, or maybe pull off a trade to consolidate on the roster before training camp? Do you think the Knicks make any other moves, or do you think they're done?
So, I'm not going to get into the cap mechanics, but the Knicks, one way or another, should be able to add another NBA veteran, regardless of how many years of experience they have. I would expect them to sign someone, whether it's Ben Simmons, whether it's Landry Shamet, someone else that maybe we're not thinking of. Other than that, I would expect the roster to be the same with 2 giant asterisks. First asterisk, should anything happen with the Giannis situation, should that change in any way, I'm sure the Knicks would at least want to be in that derby. I want to add LeBron to that, but
man, come on.
I feel like if that was going to be a thing, it would have been a thing by now. And they sat out Durant, I think because he's older and how much money he's going to be owed. And I think LeBron is older and wants to be paid as well. So why would that be any different? The other asterisk that I'm at least going to be keeping my eye on is the extension discussions between the Knicks and Mikal Bridges, and to a lesser extent, the Knicks and Mitchell Robinson.
Yes.
Because this front office has had a very clear track record. If they cannot come to an extension with you, they will trade you. They will not allow you to go into unrestricted free agency. Now, I think with Mitchell Robinson, I'm less certain that they would trade him like now if they feel like they're far apart, because he's a smaller salary. Maybe they even say like, all right, maybe we actually want to keep him as a something that we could trade at the deadline. Bridges is more interesting because I do not believe going into next summer, where a lot of teams are going to have cap space, and Mikal Bridges is the sort of player that a team could talk themselves into, like, hey, Is he going to be worth, $35 million or $40 million a year? No. But you look at what else is available, we at least know he's going to be able to give us 82 games a year. And he's going to be able to give us 35 minutes a night. So I don't think they could afford to go into next summer with that situation uncertain. So if he does not extend, that is a situation that I would keep my eye on.
Yeah, but it's funny. I almost thought you were going to say LeBron was the second asterisk. So I'm glad that you did not do that. Although, listen, I understand a lot of Knicks fans who watch this show and your show are team bringing LeBron to New York as if it was 2010. I don't know why. I think we can move on past that. That's all I'm going to say on that. But to the other points you mentioned, your second asterisk was really interesting to me because, yes, I think those are two names that Knicks fans should think a little bit more about and wonder if the team may want to flip those guys for maybe a couple of more role players to try to extend their window. Or like you said, the Knicks have a history of, hey, okay, if we can't come to an agreement on extension, we're gonna keep this thing moving in another way. I do wonder if those are possibilities. I'm not saying not reporting.
Yeah.
They're possibilities. The Mitch one is really interesting to me as well, too, as though is Mikal. But I'm inclined to agree with you that if it was to happen with Mitch, and there was a deal, that feels like something would happen closer to the trade deadline, not this summer.
Yeah, I just think it's tough because you look around the league and they're just looking at Mikal Bridges and what he makes. This is a situation where because he does not make a lot of money, it's almost harder to find the right kind of deal for him because if you're trying to bring back that's the other thing. The Knicks do not generally send out players in trades to take back worse players or do we'll send out the better player and you send us two good players, but neither of those players are as good as the one we're sending out. And plus now they actually have real depth. So would they want to make a 1-for-2 trade? I don't think they would. You could have, listen, if Jaren Jackson Jr. didn't extend, and obviously he has since suffered an injury, so it's further a moot point. But I would have been curious about that situation because he, like Mikal Bridges, also is vastly underpaid, but he extended, so it's not a conversation.
Yeah, so it's going to be very interesting to see. Mikal Bridges extension, Mitchell Robinson potential extension, something to keep an eye on, or do those guys get moved? But, J-Mac, based on what we know right now, have the Knicks done enough to keep pace with the rest of the Eastern Conference this summer? Because we've seen some teams make some moves. Atlanta's made some moves. Orlando's made some moves. Even the Cavs with a smaller move for Lonzo Ball. Have the Knicks done enough this summer?
Yeah, if the question is, have they done enough to keep pace with the East, I think the answer is yes. I have a lot of respect for where Detroit was already headed, and they've gotten better, I think. Well, I mean, Beasley was a really important part of their team, and I know Duncan Robinson's a good movement shooter, but let's just say Detroit will be better. Atlanta's certainly going to be better. Orlando's going to be better. I have respect for all those teams. If any of those teams finished, second in the East, would I be shocked? No, I would not. That said, I think the Knicks are still better than all three of those teams and anybody else you want to talk about. And then it comes down to them in Cleveland. And look, I know Ty Jerome did not have a great playoffs, but you could pretty easily argue that he was the fifth most important player on their team last year, and he's gone. And the Knicks did not lose any of their most important players from last year's team, and they have added two guys who, again, are they going to be the seventh and eighth man, the eighth and ninth man, the sixth and seventh? We could have that conversation, but they've added two important pieces, and they think they have made a coaching upgrade. And they may have made a coaching upgrade. Again, not to say that Mike Brown's a better coach than Tibbs, but maybe a better fit for this team right now and gives them more of what they need. So I would say yes, but I still want to see it because, again, we'll be talking about this, I'm sure, all year long. Can they fix those kind of fundamental issues that held them back last year? We'll see.
That brings us to the last thing for me here, J-Mac, because when you look at this roster, assuming it stays what it is now, maybe there's an extra piece or two added. Do you believe this season coming up for the Knicks is NBA Finals or bust, given the front office's investment, as you mentioned, in upgrading the bench and the hiring of Mike Brown? Is it Finals or bust for the Knicks this season, or do you look at it differently?
It has to be. I mean, serious. It has to be because what's the alternative? The alternative is you lose to a Cleveland team that has disintegrated for 3 straight years in the playoffs. You lose to a Detroit team or an Orlando team or a Hawks team that, like, again, respect what they've done, but like, really, you're going to lose to one of those teams? You're going to lose to a Boston team that's missing their best player, and you go on down the line. I just don't see anyone else in the East that has a real argument. Like, and you could turn around and say, well, you would have said the same thing about the Pacers the year before. Maybe you would have, not you, Dexter, but the theoretical you out there.
Right.
Maybe someone else would have said that. I know after the Knicks played the Pacers a year ago, I had a lot of respect for them going into that series, and I certainly had a lot of it coming out. And I know they got swept by Boston in those Eastern Conference Finals, but they were in all those games. They showed themselves to be a genuine threat to win a conference. I don't think that there's another team out there right now that the Knicks can look at and say, yeah, that team should beat us in a 7-game series, including Cleveland, based on, again, what we've seen from the Cavs in the postseason. Maybe this is finally the year the Cavs turn it around in the playoffs and look like a team that really means business. Knicks got Jalen Brunson. They have a cast of characters around him that is maybe, are they the perfect supporting cast for him? Maybe not. But I think they're good enough. And I think, last thing I'll say, they got as far as they did last year on effort, because I do think they played really hard, grit, toughness, all those comebacks and everything, and talent. But I still don't think that this version of this team has hit their stride on either side of the ball. So you now have 82 more games to figure out how to hit that stride on at least one side of the ball, hopefully two sides of the ball. If you could do that, I think we'll be talking about a finals team next June.
This is definitely a clipped, because you have to realize what Jonathan Macri just said in breaking down why it's finals or bust. J-Mac, I know you remember this. You've been a lifelong Knicks fan. 5 years ago, I'm just going back to 5 years ago, my friend. Did you think you'd be saying those words where you are finals or bust? And you sound, I don't want to say you're confident, because it's a long season, a lot could happen in the next 82 games. But you're like, yeah, this is what I expect to see from the Knicks. I think they should get to the finals. I don't think there's any team in the East that could beat them. 5 years ago, you would have dreamt of saying those words, and now here you are on New York Got Game saying it's finals or bust. They
were as dysfunctional as any organization in sports, as recently as early 2020. So yeah, it's like 5.5 years ago. And what they've done since then, for the most part, is put one foot in front of the other, make mostly smart moves. Have they taken some gambles? Yes. Has every one of those gambles paid off in the way that they might have expected? No. But you get a couple extra bites at the apple when you go out and you sign a Jalen Brunson in free agency. When you get Josh Hart for a late first-round pick, and Cam Reddish, and the other, when you drafted Deuce Bride in the second round, even. They have what it takes. I still want to see it, Dexter. I still want to see it,
of course,
because as hopeful as I was a minute ago, I mean it when I say I don't think we ever saw a finals team last year. And I realize what I'm saying. I know what I'm saying. This team was up 3-1 against Boston. They beat Boston. They would have gone up 3-1 against Boston even if Tatum didn't get injured. Game 4 against the Celtics, I'll never forget it, because it was as good as they played all season. But we never got that consistent two-way play. We have to see that. If we see that, then I will go from being hopeful to confident. I can't say I'm confident yet. Right. I am hopeful.
Hopeful until the first 3-game losing streak next year, when all the Knicks fans are on the ledge and panicking, and they want to get Mike Brand out of here, and everything will be wrong. It's a process. Listen, and I will say this as we wrap. I had no idea how the season would go. I was in agreement with you that the team last year, this past season, never felt together to me fully. That's not a knock on anybody or the team. It's just They changed 3/5 of the starting lineup. There was going to be some adjustments. I kept saying I thought next year's team would probably be better. Now, I didn't think they'd fire the coach. I didn't think they'd make these changes. But I still think if Mike Brown does the job that he was brought in here to do, there's a way this team can be more cohesive. There's a way they can be more, the talent can be more actualized and realized on the offensive side of the ball and the defensive side of the ball. And if that happens, then you're right. I think there'll be some confident Knicks fans. I think there'll be some Knicks fans saying it with their chest. They can win. But either way, man, the point I'm trying to make is it's a good time if you're a Knicks fan. If you remember what it was like 5 years ago, this isn't bad. When we're having this conversation, this isn't bad.
It should be a good time. It should be a good time for as many questions as they still have. There's a lot of reason to be hopeful about this team. There's a lot of reason to be excited about this team. You just hope that everybody in that locker room understands the opportunity that they have, and is willing to be selfless enough. No one's saying you gotta, go out there and not ever take a shot or anything, but be selfless enough on both sides of the ball to make it happen. Because again, the talent is not a question. They have the talent.
They do. We will see. It's been first week of free agency. It's been fun. Summer League is coming up. A little time where we get a little bit of a break from the Knicks coming up. But it's always a pleasure to talk to my guy, Jonathan Macri, the Dean of Knicks Film School. Please check out all the work they do covering the Knicks. I know they'll still have some content going throughout the summer because, we got to feed the beast. We got to give the people what they want. J-Mac, I'm sure we will connect at some point later this summer. Enjoy your summer. It'll be stress-free. You don't have to worry about any losing streaks or anything like that.
We hope.
We hope. Well, you know what? I said that. I'm knocking on the desk right here in front of me.
Me too.
You don't know what could change. A lot could change. You're right. Even in the offseason, we think it's quiet, and then something happens in August, and who knows? But always appreciate the insight, my friend, and we will talk soon.
Thank you, my friends. Always my pleasure to come on.
The Knicks are on fire!
So you know the deal. Basketball, it never stops. It just keeps going. We have free agency start this week. Next week, start of Summer League, and the Knicks will tip off their Summer League action on Friday, July 11th against the Pistons. So we'll get a chance to see how some of the young players the Knicks drafted last year play there. I'm talking about Pacome Dadier, Tyler Kolek, Ariel Hukpurdy. Great experience for those guys to try to improve in year two and see how they can contribute to the big team this coming fall. As for the New York Liberty, they are now in the midst of an 8-game homestand. Yeah, they're pretty much home all through the month of July. They had their first game the other night of the homestand against the LA Sparks and got themselves a nice victory there. Very interesting thing in that victory, head coach Sandy Brondello called it a must-win. Liberty obviously won. And now this stretch is important because they've got these games at home and they could have a chance to make things better than they had been playing before. Before Thursday night's game against the Sparks, they lost 5 out of the last 7 games. The defense had not been looking that good. We know they're without Jonquel Jones. They just got Leone Fevich back. But this week, very interesting. They've got the Storm on Sunday. Then they have the Aces on Tuesday. And then next Sunday, they play the Atlanta Dream. So 3 definite, formidable opponents. Some opponents they've already taken some L's to in the Dream. And they've also lost to the Storm earlier this year, so they're looking for a little bit of revenge. A very interesting stretch for the Liberty throughout the rest of the month where the schedule gets a little bit harder. Caitlin Clark and the Fever, they come to town twice this month. You can catch them on the 16th and the 22nd at the Barclays Center. So the Liberty have a chance to really turn things around and start looking like a championship contender again because they faltered for a bit here, but the team believes they can get better and back to some of the defensive intensity and dominance that we saw from them earlier in the season when they got off to a 9-0 start. That's going to do it for this edition of New York Got Game. As always, we got to thank the people that make the show look good, and I got to thank my guest, Jonathan Macri from Knicks Film School, for joining us. But back to the people who make the show look good. Producer, Erica Block. Associate producer, Nick Federico. Editor, Eduardo Guerrero, and production assistant, Olivia Cilio. I'm Dexter Henry. We'll catch you next week with another edition of New York Got Game.
And thanks for watching New York Got Game. Boom shakalaka.